In this video, I'm going to show you how to produce the function that's described in the practice exercise. This function, as described, is designed to have you send in an array list of integers, and the function will return a count of the number of items in that array list, which are single-digit positive numbers. Now, since this is simply a function that was asked to be done, you could have turned it in some kind of Word document where all you had was the function itself. That was sufficient. What I'm going to do here is actually show you how to wrap it into a class so you could test it in Dr. Java before turning it in. So let's just create a class which it will be contained in, and we'll call it practice because it's a practice exercise. That's the class. There are no attributes to the class right now because it doesn't really hold anything, and the function that you were asked to write receives its data as a parameter. We do want a constructor so that an object can be created. That constructor doesn't do anything other than create the object. So now let's look at the function that you need to create. The function is returning a count, which is an integer. Now let's name the function something that somehow describes what it's doing. It's counting single-digit items, so we'll call it single-digit count. It receives an array list of integers. We'll call that object AL. Now, one thing we have to do, since we're using array lists, we're using a class, the compiler is going to have to know all the information about that class. So we need to import the library where that is located. And the array list is in the util library. So we will import the specifications of the array list so that the compiler knows everything about it and therefore is able to use it. Okay, now let's look at this function. We receive the array list as a parameter, so now we have the AL object available to us. We know we're going to produce a count, so let's declare the variable for that and set it equal to 0. Now, let's think. Are there any other variables we would need? Well, to determine that, let's figure out what we're doing in this function before we start writing, which is always a good thing to do. Have a general idea what you're going to do, and then you write the code for it. So, we need to go through the array list, looking at each object of the array list, testing whether that object is a single-digit positive number. If it is, we increase count by 1. And that's all we do throughout the array. And then when we're done, we return the count. So we have a pretty good idea of what we're doing, and the only other variable we would need would be the loop variable, which can be declared inside of the loop structure. So let's do that. First, I'm going to put in a little comment that's describing what we are doing. Running through array list, counting items. What is a single-digit positive number? Numerical purists tend to say that 0 is neither positive or negative, so to prevent any arguments, we won't include that. So what does that leave us as single-digit positive numbers? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So the values are between 1 and 9. All right. That's a description of what we are doing. Now we will set up the loop. We'll use a for loop because we know how far we're going through. We may not know the exact value of it, but we can retrieve the number of items in the array list. We will initialize our variable, and what does the variable stand for in the loop? That's the index of which is the current item in the array list we're looking at. So it has to be initialized to 0 to begin at the first index. Our exit will we loop for as long as the index value is less than the number of items in the array list. How do we get that? Well, if you look at the lesson notes, or take a look at the online Java tutorial, which lists all of the methods of the ArrayList class, you will discover that there is a method called size that does it. So we are using the object named AL and then calling the size method to retrieve the number of items on the array list. And each pass through the loop, we are increasing I by 1. Okay, so that's our loop. Now, what do you do inside this loop? Well, we are testing if the current item on the array list is between 1 and 9. If we express that in math, we'd have something like this. The value of our variable, call it x, is between 1 and 9. But we can't do a comparison like that in Java. We've already seen that. We have to break this up. We do the first part where x is greater than or equal to 1, and then the second part, x is less than or equal to 9, in a complex condition. So it's two separate conditions combined by an and, because they both must be true. X must be greater than or equal to 1, and it must be less than or equal to 9. So it's an and that would join them. So knowing that, let's build our conditional statement that's using the if keyword. And what is x? X is the current value on the array using the index variable. So again, if you look through the lesson notes or look at the online Java tutorial for the ArrayList class, you will discover that there's a function called get, which retrieves a value. So, given that, we are using the AL object and calling the get function at the current index. What holds the current index value? I does. So long as the variable that we are retrieving, or the value we are retrieving, is greater than or equal to 1, and the and symbol are 2 ampersands, and that same value that we retrieve from the array list is less than or equal to 9. That's our test. If that test is true, we are incrementing count because we have a single-digit positive number. We don't do anything if the condition is false. So that's the end of our if. And that's the only thing we do inside the loop. We are simply testing the value of the current item to see if it is between 1 and 9. So that actually not only ends our if, it ends our for loop. Which is here. So after the for loop, all we do is return the count. And then that would end the procedure. Fine. Now let's save this. I called the class practice, so by default it's going to save it as a file called practice. And I'm going to compile it. It should compile unless I made any stupid little typographical errors, and I did not, so it compiled. So that's the producing of that function. If you don't want to see the test, you can end this video now. So for those of you who are still here, clearly you want to see how to test this in the interactions pane. So we'll go into the interactions pane to test this class. Now, remember the interactions pane acts just like the computer in terms of sending it Java statements to perform its work. And like the computer, it's starting with just a general library. So if we're going to be using an array list, which we are, because we have to create the array list to pass into the function, we need to import the library containing the array list here, just like we have to in the code. Okay, so now our array list is imported. So there's two basic things we have to do. We have to create the array list and then create the object that uses the array list. We can do those in either order, but let's create the array list first. So we are creating an array list of integers. Call it A. All right. And now let's add a few things to it using the add method. We'll add a 2 and a 4 and a 7 and a 10 and a 12. So there are 5 items on the array list, but only 3 of them are single-digit positive numbers. And for the heck of it, let's add a negative value, -3. So now there's 6 items, but again, only 3 of them are single-digit positive numbers. So that should be the count that we would get back is simply a 3. All right, now let's create our practice object so that we can test this method. So we will create a new practice object. And now we will call our function, which is called single digit count, using the array list of A that we have created here. So P is the practice object. We're calling single digit count, passing in the array list of A. I don't want to hit a semicolon at the end. I want to see displayed the return value. To do that in the interactions pane, you don't type the semicolon at the end. And we got back a 3, which is what we were supposed to get back. So we know it's working.